great Odin's raven.
I feel the need for speed.
Ow! Oh, no, not the bees! Not the bees! Ah!
Hey, where did you get those clothes? At the toilet store?
And I thought my jokes were bad.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Hope you are staying safe and warm because chances are, if you're listening to the show, you're from around us, so you may be buried in snow or ice or something or other. But hey, that gives you a good excuse to be listening to this show because we're going to keep you safe because we're not going to be making you drive. So welcome to the show. Chief, you were with us, of course, today. How's it going, man?
Oh, it's going good.
Staying dry there in Fayetteville?
Preparing for the move and whatnot.
You got your milk and bread?
Oh, I keep it on deck.
Got to keep the house stocked. You don't want to have to make that run. Well, look, it is starting. The weather may turn poorly, but we do have a lot of sports still going on. We're in the off season, obviously, of a lot of sports. NFL, of course, is in the off season, but we are going to talk some NFL. We're going to talk some college basketball. Excuse me, I believe. Here in a bit as well, but we're going to start off with a sport, Patrick, who, more specifically, a league whose season is supposed to begin Friday.
Isn't it? We say it's supposed to begin Friday because
that's right. MLS is currently in labor talks, and who knows? By the time you're actually listening to this, those talks may be done with and this may be over. But as of now, it's kind of minute to minute, hour to hour as to what's going to happen. Of course, the first game of the season scheduled is LA versus Chicago in LA on Friday. Now, I've been keeping up with I've been on Twitter all day just following, just seeing just looking for updates. Chicago players did get on the plane, did fly out to...
they flew today?
They flew out today.
I read they were supposed to fly out tomorrow, but I guess they flew out today instead.
Yeah, they flew out today. So they're heading to L.A. as if the season's going to happen. So it's going to be a bit of a wait and see. If anything happens, it's going to happen last minute. We may have a bit of a strike going on. Now, Patrick, I'm going to ask you, you probably are more like our listeners in the fact that you don't follow that nearly as much as I do. I
follow it, but I'm in the in-between. I follow it, unlike probably most of our listeners, but I don't follow it to the extent that you do.
I listen to like three or four different podcasts usually.
Which I need to at least listen to one of those.
I'll give you a list of a couple that you should check out. But hey, look, the issue is, and of course, anytime you got a labor dispute, you've got an issue between the owners and the players. Now, specifically this year, specifically for this one, the players are really, really, really pushing, and they've made a fairly hard line with the stance for free agency, because that's not something that the MLS, which is a single entity ownership, which means every team is technically owned by the league. Now, granted, you do have other owners, but technically every team is a part of MLS in big picture, and so there isn't free agency. Now, Patrick, I guess from more of an outside perspective, you being slightly more outside on this, what do you see as being, are the players asking for too much right now? Should the owners be giving it to the players, no questions,
As for someone on the outside, I think when they see that the players are asking for free agency, I think they're going to automatically jump on the side of the players, because they're going to say, well, every other major sports league in the U.S. has some type of free agency. They're not exactly all built the exact same, but for the most part, it's free agency and the basics of baseball, football, basketball, they're all the same. Now, whenever you get into like franchise tags or arbitration and things like that, that's whenever you see every league has something unique about the free agency that they have. But for the most part, these generic fans are going to say, "Oh, MLS players want free agency. Why don't they already have that? Why can't they? Why can't they have that?" But what they don't understand is that the MLS is different from all these major leagues in the sense that the MLS, Major League Soccer, is still very young. They're not really generating the revenue that every other league has. I want to say that I've read that they're still losing a little bit of money every year, if this article that I'm reading is correct. Plus, whenever you look at salaries in general, the vast majority of these players, they're not making millions of dollars. They're not even making $100,000, which most people think is crazy, but at the same time, this is what happens when you're in a young league.
Yeah, go on.
Whenever you're these young players and you prove yourself in the MLS, that's whenever a lot of these guys, they'll go overseas and play. I mean, they're not going in. They're not playing the Premier League. They're not playing in the Arsenal. They're not playing with your Man U's. They're playing in, I don't know, some obscure league that you've never heard of, but they're making more money. And that's why they do that. And so while we've seen these big names, kind of like our
your Clinton Dempsey's, your Robbie Keanes, your Michael Bradley, Josie Altidore, Giovinco.
Your young up-and-coming stars like your Breck Shays and players like that coming back over to MLS this past off-season, which a slew of them on the national.
Yeah, mixed Discarud.
Year. They're wanting to build the national brand of soccer that we have here. Still, it's going to drive up a lot of prices and things like that for MLS, which is what the owners don't want to do, and that's what makes it tricky, especially for such a young league where they're not generating as much revenue as, say, like even like a San Diego Padres baseball club, or maybe even.
I think we may have lost Patrick for a second. But we kind of lost you there for a second, Patrick. No, I think you're right. I think this is something that I think, and you kind of mentioned it offhand in a different way, and it made me kind of think about it, and it's something I really hadn't thought about a whole lot before. I think especially you look at people who are fans of MLS who are super invested in MLS, and they're saying, and even from the outside, people look and say, well, they don't have free agency? Why don't they have free agency? But if you really look at it, the NFL only got free agency in 1993.
Exactly.
Super Bowl I was 1967. Now, granted, that league still went a little bit differently. It didn't work exactly, and we're not going to spend time on the differences between how the NFL was run pre-free agency and all that. But you think about it in that sense, and you think, look, the biggest league in America, the biggest sport in America, didn't start free agency until 1993. Major League Baseball didn't start until 1994. Wasn't that the big, the main issue with the 1994 lockout and strike?
Yeah.
And so you look at it, and those, and especially the Major League Baseball forever have been around without, free agency. And I think that's where people, I don't want to say people are wrong to say, oh yeah, well they should absolutely have free agency, because I think free agency is something that comes along, especially with having a sustainable league. And it's weird because I'm on the player side with this whole thing, but at the same time, like, I understand where the owners are coming from, and part of the issue, and you kind of mentioned it with that article. Part of the issue is that no one's really sure if MLS is making money or losing money. Every year to year. I mean, we've seen articles where they say, yeah, we're losing $100 million a year, but those articles also came out months before a labor dispute started. And so you're kind of like, well, are they just saying they're losing money so they have a little bit more of a bargaining chip when it comes to it? You look at the TV deal that just got signed. I'm trying to think of what it was. I think it's $80 million, I think is what the TV deal is. I can't.
Something like that. I actually saw that same.
Yeah, TV deals worth $80 million a year. Univision, ESPN, Fox, or maybe Unimas. I don't remember. NYCFC pays $100 million to come in as an expansion fee, and that's been the expansion fee. So it's kind of one of those things. Average attendance is above 19,000 fans. I mean, you look at Seattle's obviously pulling in upwards of 40,000 a year, or 40,000 a game. But you look at that and you almost wonder, well, how are they not making money? And so I understand it I understand what the owners are saying and what they want. More recently, as in like last night, as in throughout the day, the owners have proposed a bit more of a conditional free agency, and I think the latest
they made two different ones, didn't they?
Yeah, I think the latest I've seen is 28 and 8 years. 28 and 8 years of service.
32 and 10.
Yeah, that was the first one.
And then they moved 28 and 8.
I've seen 28 and 8 since, which, and I think the 28 and 8 one I've seen, and somebody said that basically would affect one person in MLS right now.
The 32 and 10 wouldn't even apply to anyone until 2016 with Brad Davis in Houston.
Yeah, and so you look. I think the answer is somewhere in between it. If you're talking 26, and I think the trick is it needs to be, first off, it needs to be it needs to be 26 years old or. And I think the answer is probably more somewhere around 24, 26, somewhere in there. And I actually have no problem with that, because you look at the NFL, most of your players that are going to be on the team that aren't going to be cut are guys who they're going to be drafted. And if you're drafted, you pretty much have to sign, what is it, a 3 or 4 year deal now with the way the rookie.
Yeah, and then after that you become restricted. So
yeah,
your team to carry on can match whatever they have.
And so I don't think it's far fetched, and I don't think it's that big. I don't think it, because a lot of people are looking at it like, well, the players are losing if they don't get full out free agency. Well, look, technically, if you get drafted in the NFL, you're playing for that team, because your other option is to go play in the CFL. That's it. That's your option. If you don't like what team you get drafted to, unless you're a big baby like Eli Manning and cry about it, you're probably not going to get traded. And you look at, and you brought up a good point too. And this is kind of where the owners have kind of dug their heels in and said this is that, look, if they don't like it, there's 140 other leagues in the world. There's more than that. There's that many other leagues that a lot of these guys could go play it. They're probably not going to make even as much money. I think the bigger issue, and this isn't what they're focused on as much, I think the biggest issues with the way the MLS is set up right now, I think what would fix it is you need to raise minimum salaries, because minimum salaries are too low. I'll give you that. Minimum salaries are too low, and I think you raise the salary cap a little bit, because, and this is why I don't understand why the owners are so against free agency, is because they claim, well, if free agency happens, well, then we have this deal where costs are going to go up because, player X is going to want, $750,000 a year from, let's say, the Sounders, but some other team's going to offer him, the Colorado Rapids are going to offer him $1 million a year, and then we're going to drive up. But here's the problem with that. That's a decent argument, except for the fact that MLS has and probably will always have a salary cap. And so if you have a salary cap, prices are going to get driven up a little bit. But at the same time,
stay within the cap.
Exactly. It's not like baseball where you're going to have a team like the Yankees who are just like, hey, we'll pay a luxury tax. Who cares? Let's get this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy and load up the team. It's not like the English Premier League where you don't have salary caps, and so, or La Liga would be a better example. So you're not going to have Real Madrid and Barcelona who are like, hey, we got Messi. Hey, we got Neymar. Hey, we got Luis Suarez. Hey, we got, name whatever player is the best in the world right now, and that's who we want. That's not going to happen because you have a salary cap. And so I think on the owner's part, I understand where they're coming from and I get what they're trying to say. But at the same time, your argument loses water and the costs are going to go up as soon as you have a salary cap. Now, where the salary cap is right now, I don't think it's feasible to have free agency. So I think salary cap has to move up. But you're not going to have guys because look. And you kind of said, some of these guys, you can go to another country. Well, you can go to another country, but you're probably going to get less money, honestly, than you're getting here, because we have a premium on American players because we want American soccer to grow, and so we're actually probably willing to pay American soccer players more than you want. A lot of your MLS guys, your bottom level MLS guys that are making close at or league or close to league minimum, are probably talking about playing in like the second division in Norway or the third division in Spain. You're not going to be making a ton of money necessarily. You're going to be making essentially what you're making here, where here you're in the top league, and so I think they'll get a deal done. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't get a deal done by the time the season starts. It'll happen this first week because I don't think it'll go longer than that. I think the owners have shown that they're a little bit okay with budging because they weren't even talking free agency. That wasn't even going to be on the table. And they've already thrown out multiple proposals with that as an option. So I think it'll happen because your owners at Orlando City FC at Orlando City and New York City, those two new teams that are coming in the league, I think are going to start putting on a lot of pressure because Orlando has sold out the Orange Bowl at 60,000 people for their first game. Yeah. They're not going to want that game to not happen. So I think you're seeing some of that, and I think we'll get a deal done. It may not be exactly what the players want, but look, I think kudos to them for trying to get what they want. But understand this: you're talking about taking a league from something that doesn't have free agency at all, or anything similar to free agency, to going full out free agency the first year. I think the issue is I'm okay with a limited free agency, obviously better than what they've proposed so far, something that actually works. A 24, 25 year, I think 25 and 5 is probably the sweet spot right now. You sign a deal, you sign a new a CBA, new collective bargaining agreement for 5 years at the max, and you readjust it there. You see what's happened. You see if prices have skyrocketed on players, which is not going to happen because of the salary cap, and you reevaluate there at that 5 years. If it's worked good then and you think you can go for full free agency, then go full free agency. But get a little bit of something that's a little bit different to, quote-unquote, give it a try. The league's not going anywhere, but I do think that a work stoppage would not be a good thing, especially with all the momentum going into this season that Orlando City has, that New York City, despite how much they've botched the offseason with the Frank Lampard situation, how much still they have going into it. I mean, Seattle's going to be really good. LA is going to be good this year again. The Western Conference is just loaded, and I want this season to start because that's good. And look, and this is because Montreal last night won a CCL game, or a CCL home and home against a Mexican team, which never happens. And they're a terrible team, which, by the way, that was a beautiful goal last night. If you haven't seen it, go find it on YouTube or on Twitter. It's all over the place. Montreal scoring a goal in the 93rd minute of a CCL match. So great goal there. But hey, let's get the league started. Let's get the season going because I'm ready for MLS soccer. I've got my Sounders hat on. I'm ready for MLS soccer. So let's get that to happen. But hey,
you know what? I'm excited to live with you to watch more soccer.
Oh, that's going to happen.
That's one of the many things I'm excited for.
Oh, that's going to happen. So look, let's take a break.
Yeah.
Let's take a break. We'll come back and talk some college basketball right after this break. So we'll be right back. All right, guys, we're back, and now it's time to move on to a little college basketball. Patrick, we're probably going to spend the majority of the time talking about the number one team in the nation because, last weekend, Saturday, we watched the Hogs go down to Kentucky, number one Kentucky, and not that anybody was surprised that happened. Yeah, sure, they were on a little bit of an upset alert. But when Kentucky wins, the nation is not surprised by that. But I feel like, and we kind of talked about this a little off the air, despite watching that game and despite the fact that, yes, they're on a little bit different level than every other team in college basketball this year, I'm still not sold on. I am a little bit. Are you sold on how good they are?
I mean, they're a good team, obviously. Whenever you make it through I think they have a game on Saturday, but whenever you make it through the SEC regular season undefeated going into the tournament, you're obviously good. But my thing is, everyone is talking about Kentucky as if they're going to run the table, as if they're going to be the next team since I think it was a Bobby Knight Indiana team, if I'm not mistaken, to go undefeated throughout the tournament. I don't see them as a team to do that. If Kentucky was going to do that, it was going to be an Anthony Davis team that's going to go undefeated. If they're going to do that, it was going to be a Coach Cal team with maybe Derrick Rose in Memphis that was going to do that. I don't see this Coach Cal team as a team that's going to go undefeated. I say that because one reason, there's multiple reasons why I say this, but one reason is because they don't have the go-to player that defines the team. They don't have a face of Kentucky.
You don't think Cauley Stein's that guy?
Most people will say, "Oh, they have Cauley Stein." I don't see Cauley Stein as that type of player. I don't see the Harrison twins as that type of player. So maybe that's why they could go undefeated. Maybe that's their case. I don't see a go-to guy on that team whenever you're down by 2 with 3 seconds left and you need to put the ball in someone's hands. I don't see a clutch player on that roster. I don't see. Plus, another reason why I don't think that they're going to go undefeated, they get into foul trouble way too early. Way many instances you see them 3-4 players with 4 fouls, risk of fouling out. Maybe 1 or 2 have already fouled out. Whenever you're playing deep in the tournament, you're going to face maybe a Wisconsin team, maybe a Duke team, a Gonzaga in Arizona. How are you going to focus up against those guys when those guys don't have that sort of foul trouble like a Kentucky team? So how are you going to respond to an instance when you have 2 players with 4 fouls, 2 star players, when on the other side of the bench, on the other side of the court, they've got maybe 1 player that's got 3.
Yeah.
So how are you going to respond to that sort of instance? Plus, they're not really that great. They're good, but whenever you're playing a Coach Cal team, you obviously aren't that good at free throws.
Yeah.
So put all that together on sort of maybe a couple of other instances, how are you going to win the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, I'm trying to see if I can find the team stat. They're from the free throw line. They're shooting 71% roughly as a team. Now I don't know where that ranks nationally, but that essentially tells me that there are guys on that team that you can't trust. Cauley Stein is not a good free throw shooter. I'm looking at some of the other. I mean, Aaron Harrison and Andrew Harrison are both mediocre. Not maybe a little bit more than mediocre, but they're not great free throw shooters. The best free throw on your shooter is probably Booker. But is he? No, he's not the one. Poythress is the one who's injured.
Injured early. He's a junior, I believe.
Yeah, I think. I don't know. I agree with that. That I agree with everything you say, but at the same time, I'm not sure. like they're honestly a team that I feel like they haven't been tested by a team that legitimately should be testing them. I mean, Georgia took them in overtime in the last game, and in the last game they played it, and you kind of like, well, if they're as good as everybody thinks they are, Georgia probably should not be taking them to overtime towards the last game of the regular season. There's been games that they've, I'm not going to say struggled in, but you look all throughout SEC play, and other than a couple games, I mean, at Tennessee, Granted, they won by almost 20 points, but putting up 66 points against a Tennessee team, I just don't know. They go to overtime against Ole Miss, go to 2 overtimes against Texas A&M. Now they destroyed Missouri, but everybody destroys Missouri this year. They played close games, fairly close games against Texas, against UNC, against Louisville, and those are teams that you should beat. And granted, those games are so long ago, I don't really remember if they were close towards the end. But I wonder. They're such an athletic team, and they play such an athletic style of basketball. You wonder if eventually X's and O's, some team that's good on defense and solid on defense, is going to be able to shut that down. Because if you can match up and slow down that athleticism, I don't think they're a great team. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you can either even out their athleticism, which isn't easy to do. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's easy to do, but if you can equal out their athleticism, if you can balance out on defense and keep them from just being super athletic, I think they're beatable. Now, you look at it, and I'm looking at the current bracket, the way it's set up right now. Other teams in the bracket that would have a chance at possibly beating them, I don't know if there really are that many. North Carolina would be in that side. Wichita State would be in that side. Butler's in that side, Notre Dame's in that side, Wisconsin and LSU, just because of familiarity. Those are your big teams in that one, and I don't know if any of those teams are capable of beating Kentucky. I think Wisconsin probably has the best chance at it.
I see if Wisconsin will play Kentucky, Wisconsin wins that one. That's how I would.
You're confident on that?
I'm very confident in that.
The problem is Kentucky's a matchup problem, and because of their athleticism, they're a matchup problem. And so I think when you have a team like that that's such a matchup problem, in college, and that only really happens in college basketball,
right?
That a full team is, a matchup problem. And look, they really are. Their full team is a matchup problem for probably 99% of the teams in the NCAA. But I think there's a possibility if they face Arkansas in the SEC tournament, they could lose. Because, Arkansas lost that game Saturday, but Arkansas shot so poorly in the first half.
Second half, they matched them.
Yeah. And
second half.
And look, it's going to take a perfect game from a team. Don't get me wrong. I think you and me we're both saying they're beatable, but they're not as perfect as what everybody. They're on a different level, but they're not on such a different level that level's not attainable. I think. And
I'm not saying that they shouldn't be the number one team, because clearly they should be.
Absolutely. I think you and me are just we're cautious about placing this team on a pedestal that, frankly, I don't think they've really earned yet. Which I know you're looking at a team that's 29-0 and probably going to be 30-0 this weekend when they play, because they play Florida this weekend, and Florida has not been that good, though they played them fairly close at Florida, but that's at Rupp Arena. They're not going to lose this weekend, I don't think. Mm-hmm. But I think come SEC tournament time, you've got some teams, Ole Miss, Texas A&M. Both of those two teams have obviously both taken them to overtime already and played tight games against them. And, you've only played Arkansas once, and that was at Rupp Arena, and Arkansas shot poorly in the first half. And I know that's whatever. That's how part of that you can say, well, yeah, but Kentucky played that first half too, and so they probably played some good defense on them. Arkansas is not going to go 0 for 9 in a half shooting from the three-point line often. And so I think they kind of came out and they didn't come out and play the game they could have played early on. And I think that's why that game ended up having as big of a gap as it did. Otherwise, like you mentioned, you take that second half, it was a very even basketball game in the second half.
Score-wise, exact same, I want to say. 2 points.
That sounds right. Look,
it's just the fact that they played a very poor first half.
Yeah, I think Kentucky's very vulnerable. If you could match up with them. And that, again, that's the trick. So let's ask this, because you did mention, kind of offhand, Gonzaga loses to BYU. They drop down to number 7. So who's your next number one seed? Because I know you got Kentucky, obviously, as a number 1 seed right now. Even if they lose one in the SEC tournament, they're still number 1. Virginia is probably going to be a 1 seed at this point as well. So you look at the rest of the, we'll say the top. We'll go through the top 10, or we'll go through the top 8, because those are the only teams that probably realistically have a shot at. You got Kentucky, you got Virginia, you got Duke, Villanova, Arizona, Wisconsin, Gonzaga, and Wichita State. Now, Wichita State's probably not going to be a 1 seed, and at this point, Gonzaga probably isn't anymore either, as much as it sucks to say. Who do you think are going to be the other two, besides Virginia and Kentucky, to be a number 1 seed?
I am a really big believer in this Wisconsin team. So I say if Wisconsin keeps winning, then I see them as a 1 seed. I think they are, quote unquote, a long shot to get in as a number 1. But I believe that out of the 4 or 5 that have a legitimate argument in that last number 1 spot, I think Wisconsin should get it. Obviously, Arizona's really good. Of course, Gonzaga's really good. I think what hurt Gonzaga is the fact that they're that quote-unquote mid-major program.
Yeah.
And then the fact that they did lose to BYU, it's not the nail in the coffin, but to the eyes of the quote-unquote the voters and the people who make this bracket, in their eyes, it's the nail in the coffin because they lost before the turn. If they would have lost to a BYU team, maybe in the conference tournament, then I don't think it would have been as bad. But I feel like since they lost now going into the conference tournament to a BYU team, I think that's what's going to pretty much solidify them as a number 2 seed. But I don't see that as a bad thing.
I don't either. I'm going to say this, though. I actually think if they were going to lose a game, that one was the game to lose, because BYU is still a fairly good team. But
I think if they would have lost to anyone else, it would have hurt them far worse than losing this
I'm
game.
going to say this, though. I think they probably have set themselves up with a better chance to have a number 1 seed losing that than if they had lost in the tournament. And here's why. Because you think you got Virginia and Duke playing the same conference.
Correct. I was just thinking that same
So
thing
one of
too.
them is going to win the ACC tournament, one of them's not. If Virginia wins it, that gives Duke 4 losses, assuming they don't lose their last game of the regular season. I don't know who I'm sure they're playing UNC.
You would assume so.
But so that could drop them to 4 losses. Villanova probably won't, but could lose in their conference tournament. Wisconsin has a chance to lose in their conference tournament. Arizona has a chance to lose to Utah in their conference tournament. So these teams, there are a couple teams above them that have a good chance to lose. So now, granted, are all 4 of the teams in front of them going to lose? Probably not. But if they all do, Gonzaga can jump right back up into it, because they will win their conference championship. I think I'm pretty confident about that. They usually do pretty good in the WCC conference tournament. So I expect them to win out those games, especially now that they've lost one. They'll be a little upset about that. So I think it's better to lose now than it would be in the conference tournament. You lose in conference tournament, they would have been guaranteed a number 2 seed at best. I think now they still have a chance to work up to a number 1 seed, but they need help. They can't do anything to get them a number 1 seed from here on out, but they can have other teams help them out. I think it's probably going to be Kentucky, Virginia. I'm going to say Arizona and Wisconsin are probably going to be your number 1 seeds. I think I could see Villanova losing and dropping out in the conference tournament, and Duke being the same way.
I could very easily see that. I think one thing that's interesting with Duke and going into their tournament is the health of Okafor. I know he tweaked his ankle or his foot in the first UNC matchup, and I don't think that it's going to hurt them a lot, but the fact and he sat out the next game, which was obviously smart. I just think that if it hasn't healed all the way, and if it still gives him a little bit of issue, that may hurt them because obviously history shows us that a Duke team going into the tournament almost always has some sort of injury.
Yeah.
Whether it's Kyrie Irving, whether I'm trying to think of, I think maybe even a Seth Curry when he was at Duke. I think maybe he even had an injury going into a tournament. I mean, honestly, the list can go on and on.
Yeah.
It's kind of like them in the Kansas team as well. Kansas usually always has a big injury going into a tournament, which, knock on wood, they don't have one this year. But honestly, that is another thing going into tournaments to look out for is some sort of big injury to a team. Because every year you see one.
That's something to definitely keep an eye on. You're right, because I would almost say 9 times out of 10, not that we want anybody to get hurt, but 9 times out of 10, somebody big is going to get hurt right before the tournament. So that's something to keep an eye on. So, look, Kentucky's your number one team. They're still your favorite, but I think they're vulnerable, and I'm not going to say they're the favorite right now to win the national championship. I don't know who is, but I don't think – I guess they're probably the most likely team to, but I wouldn't put money on it.
Right.
That's probably the good way to say that. So, hey, let's take a break here. We got to talk some football still today, so we'll take a break. Keep an eye out for what's happening because this is the last weekend of the college basketball regular season before we get into tournament time, the fun time of the year. So we'll take a break, and then we'll be right back. The last segment of this particular show, Patrick, as it seems like we always do, we're going to end with some NFL because while free agency doesn't start until March 10th, there's a lot that's been going on lately, and we got to try and not keep up with it necessarily, but we got to try and keep up with it a little bit. So let's get straight into it. Just some things off the top. Peyton apparently is going to take a $4 million pay cut to stay with the Broncos, which is good for them because they need they can use some help on that team. I think, is it safe to say the biggest news so far is that the Eagles are going to trade McCoy to the Buffalo Bills? Is that probably the biggest one?
That
so far,
that's definitely been some big news. Especially, I think it's just because of the fact that it came out of nowhere. No one expected it. I mean, if you follow the Eagles closely, and if that's your team, you might have seen that coming in. But I feel like, for the most part, it was very unexpected. But when I first saw it, I was shocked. But after thinking about it, I saw where it could have made sense.
Well, I can't remember if it was on the show a couple weeks ago, or if it was just you and me talking, or if it was not even you and me talking, and it was me and our buddy Roger talking. I mentioned that LeSean McCoy was probably going to get traded this offseason because I felt like, look, he's a guy that, I mean, you even look at last year, he ended up having a decent season. He was terrible if he was on your fantasy team, so that was awful. But he's one of those guys, and look, honestly, I figured he was going to get traded. And was it you I was talking to about that?
Yeah, I mean, if it was, I don't remember. It might have been.
It was probably Roger then. Because, look, this is what I thought was going to happen. I thought LeSean McCoy was going to be used in the deal that was going to get some draft spots for the Eagles so they could move up and draft Marcus Mariota.
Okay. Yeah, I don't remember. It was definitely not me then.
It was Roger then. I'm convinced of it now.
Sure.
But no, because look, I think this, and we're gonna. This is kind of moving us a little bit into the free agency talk. Anyways, you look at the list of free agent running backs this year. You look at the list of guys coming in the draft this year, and look, LaShawn McCoy is a good running back, but good running backs are apparently a dime a dozen. You look at. Let's just go. We'll look at the free agency list. You got DeMarco Murray, you got C.J. Spiller, Ryan Matthews, Mark Ingram, Justin Forsett, Frank Gore, Shane Vereen, Stephen Ridley, Roy Halou, Reggie Bush, Ahmad Bradshaw, Darren McFadden, Noshawn Moreno, Pierre Thomas, Ben Tate, D'Angelo Williams, Steven Jackson, Chris Johnson, Anton Smith, and Jaquiz Rogers. That's your top 20. There's some good backs in there.
There's a bunch of good backs in there. There's some that are over the hill, bust, things like that. But there's also some good ones in there too.
Yeah, and I think running back, and especially running back, is one of those positions that really translates, or not necessarily translates from college to pro, but is easy. It's an easy transition from pro to or from college to pro. And so if you have to go after it, so look, Kiko Alonso, I think is a good, he's a decent to good inside linebacker, and I'm not surprised that Chip Kelly is going after another Oregon guy to get him on that team. That's what the trade's for. I just honestly thought, I'm not surprised by the trade. I'm not surprised that they got rid of LaShawn McCoy because that was a big contract. And let's be honest, you can get a guy, maybe not with the exact same production, but you can probably get two guys that can make that kind of production for the price of what he's going to cost at least. If not two guys and, an extra guy here or there for what LaShawn McCoy cost. So I'm not surprised the trade happened. I was surprised that this wasn't a move to go after Marcus Mariota. I honestly, and this is what I said earlier, or not earlier, but when I was really thinking, when me and Roger were talking about this in depth, is I thought LaShawn McCoy and Nick Foles were going to be packaged to Tampa Bay to move up a couple spots, or so that the Eagles can move up and get Marcus Mariota. Because, and this goes back to conversations that we've had about quarterbacks on the show, that we've had about quarterbacks off the show, that we've had about quarterbacks with other people, that I think specifically quarterbacks are all system quarterbacks. And Chip Kelly's system is obviously perfect for Marcus Mariota. And so while I don't think that Marcus Mariota is going to be, if he goes to all these, if he goes to Houston, or if he goes to Buffalo or something, which we're going to talk about Buffalo here in a second because they may or may not need a quarterback anymore after news earlier today. But if he goes to a place like that, I don't think he's successful. I think he'll be considered a bust quarterback because he's not going to be as good as he could be in a system that caters to what he's good at. If he were to go somewhere like say Seattle lost Russell Wilson, knock on wood, hardcore there. If somehow Seattle lost Russell Wilson and they got Marcus Mariota would be super successful there, I think. If the Eagles get him, he'll be super successful. I think he'd be decent in Washington, but Washington's so terrible everywhere else, it wouldn't make a difference too much. But you get what I'm saying? I think Marcus Mariota is a fit for that. And I know you and me we were texting last night and talking about it, and you don't think it's going to happen anymore. I'm a little thrown off by how quiet those rumors have gone about Marcus Mariota possibly going to Philadelphia. I just don't know. On some level, whatever. But I just you could say that the quiet is, well, maybe he's just not that interested. Maybe he knows something that we don't. Maybe Chip Kelly knows something that we don't about Marcus. But for my part, it just seems like it's gone quiet because he wants him and he's working something behind the doors.
Well, that could be could wear.
Nope. We may have lost Patrick again. Patrick, you there?
I'm here.
Oh, okay. We lost you for a second.
I guess my number one take on it is that they don't really need to put so much, I guess, like trade down as much, kind of sacrifice a couple picks in order to get a spot to get him. If they wanted to, they could re-sign Mark Sanchez because he did well whenever he had to be the starter.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how well Foles fits into the Chip Kelly system, which may be why they're shopping him around. There's rumors that he's going to be traded here, traded there, because of the fact that while I believe is a good quarterback, he just doesn't fit in the system that Kelly wants to implement.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, that could be why the Mariota rumors are still there, which I want to say that Dennis Dixon has signed with Philly. I want to say he's on that roster. I could be wrong, but if memory serves me right, he was signed by them, which doesn't mean by any means that the Mariota talk doesn't mean anything.
Because Dennis Dixon is not going to be your day one NFL starter, and he's probably not going to. He's not as good of a quarterback as Marcus Mariota was at the college level, and he won't be the same as what I think Marcus could be at the professional level. But
okay, he is not. He's actually with Arizona, so let's scratch that idea.
Scratch that for sure. Then he definitely won't be a day one starter for Philadelphia. Look, my thing of it is I don't think Foles is a fit for that system. As good as he is, I think there's some trade value there, and that's why I thought all along this offseason that Foles was going to get traded. Because I think if any team that's higher than them that you would be trading to get a spot for is probably going to want a quarterback. And so that's why I thought Foles would be perfect for that deal. And that's ultimately why I thought LaShawn McCoy would be good for that deal to throw in there with it. Because as good as LaShawn McCoy is, and I'm not saying he's not good, as good as LaShawn McCoy is, he's replaceable. Like I think all running backs are. I think there's different levels of running back, but for the most part, I think you could plug most running backs into most systems and you'll get similar production out of similar guys. Now, obviously, a guy like Marshawn Lynch is better for that system than a Reggie Bush would be, or even better than let's say, LaShawn McCoy would probably not fit in as good in Seattle as Marshawn Lynch would. But ultimately, look, when Marshawn Lynch has been briefly injured and he didn't play as much this year at certain times, Turbin stepped in, and Turbin's a guy who wasn't a big name and played fine. And so I think a lot of running backs are plug and play. But we'll see where that goes. I think DeMarco Murray is an interesting guy that's on that list. Patrick, people have talked about Dallas not being able to hold on to both Dez Bryant and DeMarco Murray. Dallas puts the franchise tag on Dez. Do you think they're going to be able to keep DeMarco now, or is DeMarco going somewhere else? And if so, are the Indianapolis Colts a possibility of where he ends up?
I think that there's going to be some negotiations in Dallas. It depends on whether he's going to be willing to take a little bit of a discount, which I want to say within the last 2 days that there were talks that he might take a small discount, not necessarily a quote-unquote decent discount compared to some others that we see in order for him to stay with the team. But everything I've seen is that if he were to go somewhere else, the top 2 spots that he could possibly land in are either Indy or in Arizona, because those are the top 2 places that are contenders who, quote-unquote, I guess I would say, need a running back in order to make that next step for a Super Bowl.
Well, and we talked last show about Frank Gore being a possibility at not Cleveland, at Indy. And, that was really before DeMarco Murray was possibly on the table.
Right.
If DeMarco Murray can go to Indianapolis, that quickly moves from a very, very good offense to a possibly ridiculously scary offense
The only thing that I wouldn't like about Murray being in Indy is that at least, I don't know, there were almost double-digit games where he fumbled the ball.
Yeah, that's always been an issue with him. And you know what? A guy like that, and I think this is where, and I'm not saying...
If you're going to have someone on your roster that has a fumble issue, you would want it to be DeMarco because of the fact that the production that he has before and what he does to make up for it is so substantial to where it's almost like you either forget it or it's like, oh, well, you had a fumble, but you also had
800 yards this game.
You also had 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, so it's not like it matters.
Yeah, the only thing I would worry about if I'm an Indianapolis Colts fan like you are about going after DeMarco Murray is he seems to me like he's very much a volume running back. Like he needs the ball a lot to get, not necessarily to get the yards, but he's kind of one of those that, sometimes it takes him a couple carries to warm up. And the way that the Colts have had to play without having a running back the last couple of years and having one of the best young quarterbacks, one of the best quarterbacks, period, in the league, they've been tossing the ball around a lot and haven't had much of a running game. And so I almost wonder if it wouldn't hurt. You know what I mean? Not that it would hurt the team, but, that might take – and that's going to take throws away from Andrew Luck. And while he doesn't care necessarily, you wonder how much that changes the dynamic of the offense. And if it changes the dynamic of the offense in a bad way versus should they be spending more money on the defensive side of the ball instead?
I personally believe we need to spend a decent amount on a running back.
Okay.
Because I've said this numerous amount of times, ever since Edgerrin James left to go to Arizona, the whole dynamic of our offense has never been the same because we haven't had even a decent running back to plug into that hole in order to keep up the Super Bowl drive throughout the year that we had once Edgerrin was there.
Yeah.
And so we've had guys like Joseph Adai, we've had our Trent Richardsons, which definitely failed. We've had Donald Browns. We've had recently, last couple of games that they had, our Boom Herons, our guys that we thought were going to develop into good running backs, but substantially failed miserably. But I think that whether it be a DeMarco Murray, whether it be a Frank Gore, whether it be someone else on the free agents, or maybe even a first or second round draft pick on our young running back, which I feel like we need to do that regardless.
Yeah.
I think that we do need to make a splash as far as a running back. Now, we do have the cap room in order to do that and maybe one bigger defensive name, not necessarily a big defensive name, but somewhere that it's a little bit of a splash. We definitely need some like role guys who can actually make an impact. Maybe even bring one of our free agents back, like a Darius Butler. But one thing we need is we're gonna have Mattyice back for this year because he was suspended and was hurt this past season. So we're gonna have him back. But we need someone on the other end of the line who's gonna rush the quarterback. So I think that's one thing that we definitely need to, whether it's through the draft or free agency, that's one thing we need to address. And obviously we're going to draft a lineman because we do that every year. So,
yeah, I saw an interesting stat, or I guess technically it's not, it's sort of a stat. I saw an interesting tweet earlier today that had a list of the top 10 rushers from last year and their team record, and it was the top 10 running backs by yards from last season, and I think no team that they played for was worse than 10-6. So, look, if you want to win in the NFL, you got to be able to run the ball, and So that's definitely a need for a lot of teams. But hey, there's a lot of guys out there. Let's change gears a little bit before we get out of here and talk about the money position, which is quarterback, because we've had some interesting stuff happen the last couple days that may kind of change the whole outlook on free agency. The Buffalo Bills have signed Matt Castle, which is a bit of a they signed him or they trade for him. I don't remember. Either way, they get Matt Castle, which fills a hole where we thought somebody they traded for him to get Matt Castle. Yeah, so Bills traded to get Matt Castle, and that's a team that we kind of knew was in the quarterback search. Now, I guess the question is, do you think that Matt Castle in Buffalo is the answer for this year? Not necessarily a long-term answer, but is that an answer for this year? Or are they still going to sign somebody like Mark Sanchez, who honestly I thought was going to go there anyways before this trade? Is that a let's get Matt Castle up there as a veteran stopgap in case somebody gets hurt? Or is that, hey, Matt Castle is going to be our starter?
I think that's something to where they traded for Castle just to have another veteran on the roster. If there's an injury, we'll be able to have him and plug him in. Maybe even let's bring in Castle in order to help develop E.J. Manuel, which I don't think it's going to do anything. I feel like, if anything, E.J. Manuel is going to help Castle develop because, let's face it, Castle sucks. But I think, if anything, it just proves that they don't trust EJ. They don't think he's developed enough yet. They want another veteran on the roster just to help bring leadership to the team, if anything. They're still going to bring someone in, I feel like, whether it's a Hoyer, whether it's a Sanchez, whoever it be, they're going to bring someone else in. They'll sign someone in free agency, but I feel like it's just a matter of having Castle just bring that leadership and say if someone goes down like every other Buffalo Bills quarterback does, they're going to have a backup plan, which
not a great one.
Will be decent enough until their number one guy is healthy again.
Yeah, it's interesting, and you kind of brought up a guy, Brian Hoyer. Obviously, the Browns, that's also the big news in terms of quarterbacks signing. Josh McCown, who got released by the Bucs, signs with Cleveland on a 3-year, $14 million deal. So Josh McCown is probably going to be your starter for a year, I would think, while Johnny Manziel, that whole situation gets figured out, while anybody figures out what's going on there.
No one's going.
Then, which no one really knows. So then your question is, where are guys now like Brian Hoyer going to go? Where's Mark Sanchez going to go? Where's a guy like Jake Locker going to go? And even that falls to Matt Moore and possibly Ryan Mount. Because I think Brian Hoyer is looking for a place where he can go, where he can be a starter. And I don't necessarily disagree that that's a bad idea for him. I think, while he's not a great one, I think Brian Hoyer has starter type ability in this league. I just don't know where he's going to go now. Because obviously I don't think he's going to go somewhere like Tampa. Tampa's looking for a young guy. They're going to go either Marcus Mariota or Jameis Winston. They're going to go with a rookie, it looks like. So where's a guy like Brian Hoyer going to go? Obviously that doesn't mean that he couldn't go to Tampa, but
it doesn't. He very well could still land there. I think he could find himself somewhere like maybe even a Houston team if they decide to get rid of Fitzpatrick. I don't know if that's going to hurt. If he has quite a bit on the cap for them, to where they may need to let him go, which I think that would be dumb, but you never know. I think you could see him land somewhere maybe even like a Jets team, to where anything at all is a quarterback improvement. I don't know how committed they are to Geno.
They shouldn't be if they are.
They shouldn't be. You could see them very well do something in St. Louis.
Yeah.
If they decide to do something with Sam Bradford, or even not, I mean, they could very well just sign him straight out. There are a few options that he could land to. I think something that may even be under the radar this year, if not, this may situation happen next year. Denver could be in play, something to where I don't know if they're a big fan with Osweiler or not. They could sign a guy like a Locker or something like that as a backup role, and Peyton will be able to teach them. He'll be able to be a protege. That player could just sit and learn.
Yeah.
For a while, he wouldn't be under any pressure. So that way, once Peyton leaves, Denver would have their backup plan. I mean, that's a stretch, but it's still an option. For the most part, though, I feel like every team sort of has their guy that they're committed to. Mm-hmm. It's just a sense of there's a lot of older guys in those roles, like a Brady or like a Drew Brees, like a Manning, things like that, to where in the next 2 to 3 years you'll see a lot of teams searching for their next star quarterback. So it could be a situation where some of these guys are going to be signed as backup roles, just waiting for them to edge themselves out.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see where some of those guys end up. You mentioned you talked mostly about Brian Hoyer, Matt Moore being another guy that's he's a backup, but he's making starter money really, and he's not old, but he's getting up there, and you start wondering these guys are going to be looking for starting jobs, and there's not a whole lot out there necessarily. I think you're right. Those guys are probably going to have to be willing to go to a place where they're initially probably going to be a backup, which I know is not what Hoyer wants. I know Hoyer wants to be a starter, but with the way things have fallen, with Buffalo getting Castle and Cleveland getting McCown, and the way everybody else is kind of set up, you're probably looking at another year of kind of being a backup or a bridge quarterback. We talk about bridge quarterbacks a lot. A guy who, can carry a team for, a month or two while a guy's out. I think you're looking at that's probably going to be what your role is this next year, because there's just not a lot of teams that are going to be options. And so I think that's what you're looking for. So let's see. What's today? Today is the 4th. Players can start negotiating on March the 7th. Official start of free agency is March 10th, so we're right there at that very, very close area of things about to really start happening. So keep your eyes open. That's going to be a lot of fun to watch for. Let's see. Really, the other super, super big guy, and we'll try and get out on this. We'll end on this and try and be quick about it. The other big guy is Ndamukong Suh. Patrick, just kind of off the top of your head, where do you think he's going to end up?
That's a good question. I would consider Detroit out of it, even though they didn't put the franchise tag on him. I don't necessarily mean that that's a done deal. It may be a long shot, but I don't see that door closed anyway. Arizona is always a player. Dallas is always a player. Pat McAfee has been tweeting at Ndamukong Suh to try to convince him to come to Indy. I don't know if I would be for or against it. I mean, it would be a giant help if he came, but I don't know if I want his baggage. I don't know if I would actually want him, considering the amount that it's going to cost us if he did come. Honestly, I want to say who was it that said this? I was listening to this on the drive home from work the other day. It may have been Scott Van Pelt who said this. He was saying that once Ndamukong was on the market, all 32 GMs are pretty much talking to their contract guys, their finance guys, pretty much saying, is there any way that we can move and maneuver some money around in order to bring him to our team? Because he does have a lot of talent. He does have this driving force to him, and he has been successful in this league. So once a guy of that caliber makes himself available, kind of like when Peyton Manning was cut from Indy and was a free agent, I'm sure every single team was trying to make sure that they could make maneuvers to where they could sign Peyton.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's the Ndamukong Suh is the defensive version of Peyton in the sense that where he could have an immediate impact on this team.
Oh, yeah.
And every single GM is making sure that they can afford to have him on that roster. So, honestly, while you could consider it a cop-out answer, you consider me saying, I don't know what I'm talking about, but at this point, every single team is in play for him.
Yeah.
And honestly, Oakland is a big team who could sign him. They're always a team that has a lot of free agent money, a lot of cap money on the table.
They got a lot of money because they're terrible. They don't know what they're doing.
That's true.
But, hey, No, I think you're right. You mentioned a good point. It sounds like a cop-out answer, but he is a guy that, for the most part, most teams, unless you mentioned Peyton Manning. When Peyton Manning was available, basically there were 2 or 3 teams who were like, we don't need him. Your Patriots, they got Tom Brady, don't need him. You look at the Saints, they got Drew Brees, we don't need him. Everybody else is pretty much like,
we don't need him.
Yeah, everybody else is pretty much like, hey, if we get Peyton, we'll take him. I think that's a good way to list this guy. I mean, there may be a couple guys that you're like, we're okay enough, we're good enough. I don't think Seattle would be a big. They're not probably in the market for him. They got a good enough defensive line. They'd love to have him if they could get him super cheap, but that's not going to happen. So while it sounds cop-outish, I think you're right. Pretty much everybody is in play at this point, and so it's kind of just where Ndamukong can go and where he wants to go and where he can get the most money. It's
basically a point of where Sue. It's just a matter of where does he want to go?
Yeah.
He can go wherever he wanted to. It's just a matter of where does he want to live? Where is he going to enjoy spending the off season? Which coach does he like? Which system does he like? It's just the ball's in his court.
Yeah.
Where does he want to go?
Miami, I've heard, is one, and that's not a terrible place to spend your off season, especially after living in Detroit for a couple years. So. So, hey, that's where we'll end it today. Make sure you're following us on Twitter, on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, all that good stuff that we always tell you to do. Make sure you're following Patrick at Patrick_Howie. Make sure you're following me at Matt_Sindelar to get all the latest news from us that we can give you. So with that, Patrick, let's get out of here.
My tummy's rumbling. It's scary. Tommy's got the tum rums. In America it's bling bling, but out here it's bling bang, huh?
I already took what I call a wire shower. I rub my armpits with air fresheners. New call.
Oh yeah, I'm experimenting with some new entrepreneurial ideas. That one's called Squat for Thirds. Dress loud.